How's the grind? I have bend over.
I already know.
Do you really think there's going to be a fourth, that one gentleman?
I'd like to call the City Council Conference Committee meeting of December 11th, 2018 to order.
That older gentleman?
The first item is change order number 2 to a contract by and between the City of Norman and RDNJ ATEC, decreasing the contract amount by $12,933.52 for a revised contract amount of $900,660.49 for the urban concrete rehabilitation FYE 2015 locations, Main Street, Park Drive to Berry Road. And Tony Mensa is going to do the presentation. And we always like it when you come to us and say, it's going to cost you less money. That's a good thing.
Yes. Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, council members. I'm very glad and honored to be here to present the first 2 items on the agenda. And excuse me. The first one is change order number 2 to contract K 1516-112. And it's the council agenda number 10. This is the last of the urban concrete projects under the 2010 street maintenance bond program. This one is from Main Street, from Park Drive to Berry Road. The original contract was $733,000, and there was a change order that was approved back in June of 2017 for $180,000. That brought the contract up to about $913,000. And so the project was completed a couple of months ago, and the final project cost was $900,000. That means there was $45,000 that was not used in the contract. So this change order that we are bringing to you this evening is a deduct of $45,000 to reconcile the final project cost and what the contract amount need to be. 12,000. I'm sorry, 12,933 is the deduct. The second item is also a deduct change order, and this is also the final project under the urban reconstruction projects under the same 2010 bond program. And the original project was also about 280,000. Again, there was a change order that was approved in August of 2017 for 377, and that revised the contract amount to 561. The project was also completed about a couple of months ago, and it was completed for $520,000. So with that means that there was $26,000 that was the final payment, and the deduct for that is $41,000. Saving money.
That's a good thing. Are there any questions for Tony about items 1 and 2? Councilmember Castleberry.
So on the where does that savings go? Does it just go back to the fund balance of?
That is what I'm going to talk about.
And so you saved us some money, and now you want to spend it somewhere else.
That's correct.
All right.
That is correct. We're doing more street projects. With those 2 projects completed, that means we were able to complete all 308 streets that was approved originally for about 16 million. That is about 84% of what the original budget was. The original budget was 19 million. So with that, we have about 3.1 million after all the final payments are made and the accrued interest from the fund balance. So that is how much we have left. That means we did good. We're able to build all 308 streets with less money, and we have more money to put into additional street projects. So with that, all this is tied to another item on the agenda tonight that is not on this agenda, but then it's council agenda number 27, which is a resolution to use or to reappropriate the remaining $3.1 million for additional projects. The first project that we want to do is to appropriate $2 million to the 36th Avenue project from Tecumseh to Indian Hills Road. And then the second project that we identified is to move the remaining balance, which is about 1.1 to East Interstate Drive. Originally, East Interstate Drive was scheduled to do a mill and repave, but we've identified that it needs a full reconstruct. So that is what that money is going to go towards. I think with that, did that answer your question, sir?
East Interstate Drive.
In front of
In
Outback.
front of
Made
Mile
in
of Cars.
Okay.
Ken, at some point in time, we get the access road on the other side of I-35, in front of all the car dealerships and Walmart. I mean,
That's
Sean, I
the
mean,
one he's talking about.
That's what
That is
that
what I'm
is.
talking
I thought this was Outback.
That's what I was thinking too.
Is this the west side or east side of I-35?
East side.
Mile of Cars.
Oh,
Double
okay.
E there.
Yes.
Not that I don't mind going around your patching crews every couple of weeks, because I know seems like we have to patch that all the time, and so that road seems like it's a pretty much failed road at this point, isn't it?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is why we changed from mill and repave to a full reconstruct.
Awesome. Any other questions for Tony? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item 3 is a change order number 2 to a contract by and between the Norman Utilities Authority and McGee Utility Contractors. And Charlie Thomas is going to make the presentation.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council. This is the final change order to our Crossroads water line project. We replaced about 15,000 feet of existing water line to upgrade from ductile iron to new PVC pipe. The original contract was $1,185,000 approximately in 2017. And this contract, this change order is only the reconciliation of the actual construction quantities to the quantities as the project was bid. And we used a little bit less material than we anticipated. We propose a decrease, change order reduction of 23,000 and change for a final contract amount of 1,178,293. And final payment, we're requesting approval of about $59,600. So with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions about the water line project? Everybody happy with that?
Thank you.
We got more money back. All right.
We got better water pressure.
Item number 4 is, okay, are people here, right? No. They're not. They are, okay. Okay. So item number 4 is a discussion regarding the creation of a tree ordinance. And I believe we have Don Menzie and Will Spain.
Yeah.
Kicked you out.
Don Menzie, this is Will Spain.
Yeah.
They were.
We're working on the tree board and we
Didn't say it.
helped do the, looking up the trees.
Are we gonna turn that screen off behind them? Or?
For the time being.
Hey. It's hard to see Don's face with the.
It's hard to see you guys.
So we presented approximately a month ago, I believe. We're happy to discuss it again, or we can take questions, whatever you all would prefer.
Well, I wasn't able to make that meeting, so if you could.
Yeah,
recap
you have
it.
to talk about it. So we created this policy in response to the removal of a number of trees in the public right of way, done correctly a few years ago on Berry Avenue or Berry Road. And generally, the policy applies only to street trees, those trees within the public right of way. And what we have by this policy, we are seeking to limit the alteration or removal of branches of 6-inch DBH. I'll refer to Don for technical expertise on that. So permission from a forester for any removal of branches that are 6 inches of DBH or more. Can you explain that?
Mostly the DBH is the height at 4.5 feet right here, and it would have to be about this big. So, and that's for removals. So a person could take out a small tree without having to do anything. But if the bigger the tree gets, then they'd have to get in order to take it out, they'd have to get permission from the forester. And
From like the city forester or a forester?
the city forester.
So I guess administrative question, what if we don't have a forester, or at that point in time, we're in between foresters, or that position is unoccupied?
Correct. So when we originally proposed a version of this that did not include a forester, because we don't currently have a forester, we were asked to create a policy with a forester in mind. And so those administrative details on a transition between one forester to another, I assume would be.
So the staff asked you to, who asked you to?
Yeah, so we were approached, the tree board was approached and asked for a policy with a little more, with a forester in mind. And so that's what we came back with. And that's this version.
We looked at a lot of different cities, tree ordinances in the different cities, and we really didn't come up with any cities that had tree ordinances that didn't have a forester. And so we kind of decided to write it with having a forester in mind, because it's a lot of these decisions can't be made by a layman, and you have to have somebody with some expertise. And so you can't really just assign anybody from the city to go out and make decisions.
But and I'm fine with that. I was just thinking, you know, from if I want to chop down a tree for whatever reason, and the city doesn't, and that forester position is currently vacant, am I just told, no, you can't do it because we don't have one, and we haven't had one for 6 months or 12 months, or, I mean, I don't want people to, if we're going to have it, you know, what's the alternative if that's not filled? Can they get, well, this person is a certified forester, he just doesn't work for the city, and he says it's okay, or she says it's okay.
We didn't really write anything in for that. We just assumed that there would be a forester, and if the forester left, then there would be somebody new or something like that.
I was just saying there's some way we get a forester or an arborist, somebody that, you know, didn't necessarily have to work for the city, but has the same expertise. Is that?
Council member.
So isn't that I mean, anytime we lose, I'm asking the city manager, you know, if we lose someone of expertise, do you not appoint an interim while a position's being filled, or?
We would. I mean, that's usually the typical operational, you know, we fill in where we need to until someone's replaced.
I know at the animal shelter, we lost our veterinarian, and so we have an interim, you know, veterinarian, you know, fulfilling that responsibility. So I think, well, it's a good question. I think city staff will be more than capable of taking care of that
We
situation.
didn't write anything in the policy for that situation. With tree ordinances, you have to leave for some flexibility.
Right.
You can't get too into the detail, or you just get completely lost.
Okay, I appreciate that. Councilmember Clark.
Do you have any clarification?
I just wanted to say that the ordinance does provide, or policy, I'm not sure how to refer to this, forester or their designee.
Okay.
Correct.
So I think that would be the backup plan.
Okay.
Okay.
I think my comment would be, you know, you're talking about a veterinarian that we had and paid for and then lost, and then we have an interim. We're talking about a position that does not exist right now.
Right.
And I think to have a successful tree ordinance, which I think the community and this council has shown that they want, we need to plan for a forester, or we're going to be in the same situation that we were with our awesome animal welfare shelter, where some of us were here and who spent like the first year figuring out how to find the funding for that. So it seems a little premature to move forward on that, when I believe our last budget talks covered, I think we've discussed this, a sustainability officer, but not a forester, because we passed Ready for 100. And now we're shifting from the initiative that's already passed to a new one for more staff that we don't have. Did I miss anything?
Yeah, no decision was made. It was just a conversation.
Okay.
And it was brought up, well, we should get a forester. And then we had the discussion about, we really need a sustainability coordinator to do all the things that we've said we're going to do this year with 100% renewable and all the ECAP things.
Mm-hmm.
The discussion was also had about, well, we need to be looking at getting a forester. Now, we haven't looked at any we haven't looked at the money part of it yet, but that was the discussion, with the idea that we would at some point in the near future get a forester, is the way I understood the conversation, but we have not budgeted for that yet. And so that's an issue. Councilmember Clark. I'm sorry.
The other Burnett.
The other one, Councilmember. There were three. Councilmember Scott.
Only one of me.
And then I think Councilmember Hickman had his hand up.
I know, yeah.
Oh,
Shadow
so-
name. Okay, so since we don't have a forester, would it be appropriate to defer to the sustainability officer in the case that we do get a forester and then they leave? And then, you know, in the meantime, when people are wanting to cut down trees, they got to go to somebody. Would it be?
Designate, I guess.
If the designee is the sustainability coordinator, would that be appropriate?
I'd probably look to the department head to,
We've talked about that and decided those were really two different sets of expertise.
I understand. I'm just saying, in the absence of a forester, would it be appropriate to designate the sustainability coordinator as such?
Probably not. I guess it would depend on what skills or expertise that person had.
So if we're
More
absent,
likely, it would be someone else in our department on
Okay.
a temporary basis.
okay.
or someone.
There you go.
Thanks,
You're a
James.
forester.
Councilmember Hickman.
I want to first tell you guys, thank you very much, for all your hard work and working on this topic that is of very much importance to the community. I went back and looked and found some pictures of a Save the Trees event that I went to, I think in March of 2017. So it's been something we've been talking about a long time. So I don't think we should kick the can down the road any longer. We need to move forward on this. And as to the position, the conversations we had, and I followed up with Mary about this, was when we talked about it in CPTC, and we've also, as a council, discussed that we're not moving forward with the internal auditor position because we're going to do the review of the charter process, was that we could, and it was supposed to have been sent to the finance committee, so I don't know if your committee's discussed it or not, was to look at, since we're not moving forward with that position is funded in the budget, to reclassifying that position to be a forester, and to see if it's a net wash from a budget standpoint, financial standpoint, and then, bring it forward for council to vote on reallocating or reclassifying the auditor position to a forester position, which would then solve the problem. In the interim period of time, I think that it's appropriate, like Councilmember Carter said, that the city manager could have designate somebody to fill the role of the forester in conjunction with talking to the Parks Department. We have a great staff, a lot of staff, and somebody, surely, I think we even had somebody who before used to play the role of used to be in the role of forester, but I think now is in the utility department or something, if I remember correctly. So we have skilled people on staff that could do the job if we have this ordinance passed. And hopefully the finance committee will address this topic, in December. And then we can, in January, take action on reclassifying that position at the same time as considering the ordinance. Because I do think that this is something that is broadly supported in the community. And I know from talking to people that, it has the support of, the Sierra Environmental Club, as well as the builder and developer community. And I think those are rare opportunities that we can find, joint consensus on an issue.
Councilmember Bierman.
I would also think that I would like to think that they'd go on the same track. But even if they don't, I don't think there's anything that says we can't have a really long lead-in time for this and do an effective date, a year from now, so that we don't lose the time and energy spent by committee members and council members. but that can address the fact that we may or may not have that position at the time and gives us the ability to kind of ramp up into it. Because I certainly don't want to lose momentum on the progress that we've made and the time that everyone has spent on it. So I think that that's something that we can consider if it looks like the position might not be moving forward at the same time as the ordinance. I think we have other options here as opposed to just shelving it.
I don't have a problem with that. Yes.
I have a
Councilmember
question about the funds collected. Will we put into a special fund? That sounds a little dubious. So I think we should probably clarify that. And I know that we've had some transparency and trust issues with money the city collects being thrown to the general fund and no one knows how it's going to be used. So it talks about how it will be used, but for example, with the single-use bag ordinance that we're working on, it says specifically where it will go under what department, and I think we should flesh that out a little bit more.
I think that's something that we could work with the forester. So as it says here, that they would be deposited in a fund for replanting of trees within the same vicinity. So the logic being, if we take trees from a certain area, that we replenish that area. So the exact location or geography of where those would be, that hasn't been determined yet.
Oh, I know that, but I'm talking about the fund location. Like, would it be under the Parks and Recreation Department? Would it be under Public Works? And that's what I would just like to see clarified in an ordinance.
And I think we would yield to experts here on that one.
So we can work through that.
Okay, the assumption over here is that it would be in parks.
I just think we should be very clear with that in our ordinances.
It was just to clarify whether or not you collect funds from a property and spend it on a different property. So it's really getting into the weeds about it. So that's where they kind of came with a yet to be determined funds for the original terminology, because there was some question like, well, can you actually collect here and then spend it across the streets?
Okay.
So it's a way to do that.
Well, and that's fine. But again, to clarify, my concern is that it's not going into the general fund, and we need to be very clear on where the fund is being held.
Oh, it'll probably come to council.
It would be part of the journey.
Yeah, it would probably be things that we
would be addressed before it comes to council.
Not so much fun.
So you'd have this account.
So it will go into the general fund.
But it's like whatever it's called.
Operation.
I would assume the operation is
It's like-
liability revenue account in the general fund, similar to the animal license revenues. That can only be used for those purposes, but it would be up to council to appropriate those funds once they've accumulated to some extent for that purpose.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Castleberry.
So the forester will have to, in what situations would the forester approve a tree like that being cut down?
If the forester looked at it and in their expertise, they determined it was a hazard possibly, or it was dying or decaying, or could be significant, something else that is going on with the tree, could be diseased.
And so this would be just for the removal of the tree.
Right.
Now, as far as trimming, power lines and hazards and that kind of stuff, is that
It's
still?
not going to be power lines. It's going to be more, maybe we have a real long, this is just an example, say there's a real long limb that goes out and it's over where they park their cars. And it's maybe this big and it's getting longer and longer and bigger and it's starting to worry them. And they want to reduce that limb. Maybe they want to cut the whole limb off. Well, they need to go to the forester and say, can we do that?
If it's a tree, it's in the right of way.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
And to be clear, the ordinance that's been put forward doesn't supersede any existing code provisions or any of the provisions already existing for sightlines and things of that nature. So we don't intend to, interfere with that in the slightest. So.
They're still going to have to keep. Nor does it take away any authority already given to the utility.
Correct. Right. We're operating within the constraints already put in place with this policy.
So how busy do you anticipate this forester to be? I mean, is this going to be out there doing 4 a day or once a month, or do you have any idea?
I have no idea.
I'm trying to figure out a $60,000 to $70,000 a year salary, how much work they're going to be actually doing. Because we eliminated the forester last time because they didn't have any work to do. And I want to make sure that we just, if we're going to have city staff doing something, they've got something to do. Do we have any ideas?
It was a full-time job, and
Was it?
and it was vacated last time because the forester left the position. And it was just.
So the responsibility is about the same? Or have we increased or decreased them?
Similar. Yeah, we didn't have all of these responsibilities with the previous forester, but many of the previous programs, I'm sure, would be undertaken again.
Okay.
And it would become a full-time job.
Neighborhoods, hazardous tree program, there's different things that just kind of aren't.
Yeah,
being
they're not
done.
going to be just doing this. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's plenty to do.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Apparently there are lots of things to do.
Edmond's got 3 foresters.
Wow.
I'm sorry.
Edmond has
Edmond?
3 foresters.
Wait, no,
They're
Edmund.
about the same size as what us.
Norman. They're
Edmund has-
actually not nearly as large
Edmund has a lot of things
land
we don't have.
mass wise as we are, but a lot of our population doesn't.
We have 30,000 more people.
They have more money.
The
They have a
ordinance
utility.
does.
They have a utility.
It stays into the Norman, doesn't encompass all of Norman, it stays into the Norman, not really the core, but most of the,
Urbanized area.
Not agricultural.
not agriculture.
Riparian.
Or riparian.
Riparian.
While we are having this discussion, I would like to recognize there's 2 people in our audience that are representing utilities. Tori Tedder Laughlin is representing OEC.
And she's also on the tree board.
And she's also on the tree board. And so they're very interested in this whole process and looking at ways that they can work together on this process. And the new James Chapel is now Tom McCurdy, who has come here and is representing OG&E as their customer service person. So,
And we also have our vegetation management supervisor over there.
wave your hand there.
OG's vegetation management.
And the OG&E vegetation management person.
Well,
We really appreciate you all being here.
You guys are making all kinds of revenue. We just keep coming over here and eating and hanging out at council meetings.
That's the plan.
Yeah. Do you all want to make any comments?
He does.
Behind you.
I only have one recommendation. That the ordinance is great. I think the work you've done on it is fantastic. I see that you added some stuff about, not encumbering the root flare by, hard surface in that area. The only thing I would recommend is on your replacement trees, you've done a value deferral based on quantity of trees. That's going to be very difficult on a property that's small. So you might consider doing that on either a quantity or a size of the replacement. So you may come back and say, you know what, a 4-inch caliber tree is worth this versus a 1-inch caliber tree. Because if somebody doesn't have room for 5 trees, but they want to have the option to defer the cost of the removal through a fee structure, they should be able to do a bigger tree.
I think we were trying to give the forester a little leeway there.
Okay, that would be my only recommendation from what I saw.
We wanted to set, to kind of make it as flexible as possible. But we don't want somebody to cut down a big tree and then try to plant some little bitty tree. It may be a big tree, but maybe if it's a big canopy tree, we want some more trees planted. And we want them to have to plant 2 or 3. Maybe we make them plant them in the backyard or something. I don't know.
Right. It's not limited to the
area where
to the public right of way, right? Sorry.
Yeah.
And that's
If
the
you have an
reason.
individual landowner, though, they're probably going to feel a little bit possessive about the trees they put back in. So that was my only concern. The other thing I would just suggest is as a forester who's working with lots of municipalities, some of which have foresters, there is a lot of value in having the forester. They're going to be able to help you with your green infrastructure, your urban forest. A lot of the research shows that a community that has, a mature forest, a healthy urban forest also has lower crime, has a better quality of life. And if you look at the iTree Eco information, you also see that a lot of those trees provide a lot of value, intangible value, such as sequestering carbon and pollutants. They help with wind and dust and noise and a lot of other things. So I think you look at that value of that person, you go, okay, look, this person is able to help us, drive value to 5 or 6 trees in our community. that is going to pay for that person's position, really. If they're giving us good decisions and we're saving the root system through, a construction project or whatever by doing some tunneling instead of trenching, et cetera. So I think you have that expertise in there. They're going to really drive a lot of value to the city and the people of the city. So
Thank you.
And then, okay. I think our focus was mainly on future planning. I think it's really important to hire a forester, somebody that knows how to make the right decisions and to have planning going forward. A lot of the problems that we have right now are because of poor planning. It's because we wanted quick growth, and a lot of times that's not the best tree. So right tree in the right place, having that kind of focus on it, and together as a town, we can create the look that we want. Thanks.
Councilmember Clark.
I had a question about the historic tree designation. I think I had mentioned it last time you guys were here. So once it's designated historic, it shall apply to the tree in perpetuity, and the owner shall place deed restrictions upon the tree in conjunction with Section 4, so as to inform future owners of the status of the historic tree designation. My only fear with that, and I think I touched on it, I don't really see like an exception to it, was, what if I found my dream house in Norman and we move in, I have a kid, and they're deathly allergic to that tree. Do I have to move?
So
He's like, yes, you do. Okay.
I think if it's a designated tree, then it's part of the deed, and it's. I don't think most trees that people are allergic to are cedars, and so got a big cedar.
But I mean, that just is slightly concerning
I
to
think
me.
that is an appeal that would be made to the forester.
But that's not in here.
Every restriction from the fourth section then applies to the tree.
Okay.
So then you can make those appeal to the.
You can
those
appeal
appeals
to the
the
council.
Say, please let me cut it down.
You can designate a tree historic, and then sometime in the future, this tree may die.
Right.
Got ya.
And then you're going to go to the forester and say, my tree is dying. And you
Can I remove that? And then they could grant that in that situation.
Okay, I didn't catch
But how do you remove the deed restriction on a tree that's dead?
Legal.
That's
Death
something we want to
certificate.
work on as this moves forward, is creating some mechanism with any ordinance that would allow for the city to remove the deed restriction somehow, some way to get that removed if there is an issue such as what Councilmember Clark is brought up. Even though it refers to the forest where you still have that deed restriction.
So we're working on it,
Yes,
but we don't really know how to do it.
we're working on putting the language.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a way to
Yeah.
make this legally? That's what time by title
see the
because the
street
tree
trees
died.
everywhere, but where's the?
Well,
It would just.
Other questions?
So.
the historic part of it is really pretty good.
Okay, thank
A
you.
lot of big trees in Norman that people would like to say, and this gives them kind of an opportunity to. And this is on this isn't street trees. This is anywhere on your property.
Yeah.
Councilmember Wilson.
I think the question needs to be asked, how is poison addressed in here? Like spraying of right-of-way trees, is that even?
I don't think we're addressed that.
That's in the vegetation?
That's in the vegetation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councilmember Clark.
Quick follow-up, we just briefly discussed that you'll kind of clarify that a little bit more, because I wasn't clear
Right,
reading
in
it.
conjunction with legal, we would work to clarify that the historic tree designation then falls under the Part 4B about the powers of the forester to make appeals or request the forester to remove a tree or a branch or whatever that may be.
That would make me a little more comfortable with that situation, because, I may not have allergies to a tree, but how would I ever I love trees. How would I foresee that a child would have that allergy? And that was just the thing that popped into my head. So that would make me more comfortable with it.
Well, I can see that there may become a situation where they need to remove the tree.
Yeah.
You maybe need a mechanism for that.
But I think it's nice that we make it more difficult for that to happen. So we can't just, I keep thinking about that tree on Lindsay Street. That was by Switzer Liquor, and
That's all I did was take the tree down.
Yep. And so thank you for your work on this. When I was on the tree board, we worked on the Earth Day Festival and the tree picture contest. So Way to get in there and make a difference, guys. This is awesome. I appreciate it.
Did you have another question?
Did you hear that?
No. Any other questions? Will and Don, thank you. So, yes.
Is there any kind of provision if storms take out trees, for instance? There used to be some beautiful, I think they were sycamores on 24th Southwest, who were kind of by Brahms. And that area is very barren looking to me now. And so if the storm takes out a historical tree, is that something the city helps replace, or the homeowner, or is there anything to be said about that?
The forester would probably have to make a determination that the tree needed to be removed.
But, well, I mean, this is after replacement, if there's a storm.
Oh, after it's moved, that's on private property, so that's probably just gonna be the.
I mean, in the right of way, say if it's a long.
Well, if you have a tree in the right of way, if the storm takes it out, I think it's, that's something, there's some programs that the forester could be getting, to replant trees and stuff like that. There's some programs out there.
Right, and there is a provision here that does address storms and things that we live with all the time, and
It allows
what owners
people
can
to
do.
do a little bit more when there's a storm, cleaning up trees.
One other question kind of related to that. If someone takes a tree out, say they don't know that you can't take a tree out, is there any kind of reporting, or how, what happens after that? Can they be fined? Do they have to replace the tree?
It can be they have to replace the tree with, it depends on the DBH of the tree they took out. So if they take out a tree this big, it's a smaller fine than if they took out a tree that was this big. And we have a fine schedule that you can reduce by planting trees. And you have to, and the more trees you plant, the more the tree is worth to reduce your fine. And I think you have to plant about 5 trees to reduce the fine of a big tree. It's kind of all laid out in there.
And it was written this way to encourage replanting, not just to punish someone for taking something out, but then encourage replanting in a responsible manner.
Yeah. Ideally, you would say if they take out a tree this big, we want them to plant a tree that big, but you can't do that. So we went for quantity. And they can, if they just want to plant 2 trees and pay the rest of the fine, they can. And we'll take that money and then we'll plant some more trees.
So you have some process for evaluating trees. What about by species? I mean, are oaks worth more than silver maple?
It's the DBH, which is the diameter at 4.5 feet. And so, we may have issues. One of the problems is going to be if somebody takes down a tree, what was the diameter if it's already gone? And so the forester may just have to estimate that maybe from pictures or talking to neighbors or something like that.
Councilmember Clark.
That reminds me of another one of my questions. Have you guys brainstormed ways to share that we have this ordinance and educate people so we don't have incidents like that where people are like, well, I didn't know. Any creative idea,
I suspect we'll put it on the website. Maybe talk to the transcript and do an article on it.
Yeah, I think back to your point, hopefully this is not something we shelve because we don't have the position yet. I think if we were able to hire a forester, then we could both announce the position, publish it in the newspaper, put it on the website, and try to make the citizens of Norman aware, because this is a significant change that has financial consequences, and so people do need to be aware. So I think that could all be rolled into one kind of significant push to let people know that this is an area in which we're moving. I think we'd have to do that.
That is one of the concerns I had, that somebody's going to go out and hire somebody to cut something down.
Get a big old fine.
And I would think we'd start with the tree companies in Norman.
Okay, so they know. That's a great idea.
And then say, hey, listen, you're going to have you may have some liability if you cut this down.
Okay. No, that's a wonderful idea. I don't know if we can get budgeting done in time to have it in place by April, but like in the Earth Day Festival would be a neat little way to roll it out. Awesome.
Councilmember Castleberry.
To follow up on that, we could also contact the title companies and get something. There's someone who buys a house, they're
Right, with a
Forest.
historic tree.
Right.
Right.
So on your provision here about it's in the event of storm, freeze, wind events, blah, 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 you can do it without the permission of the forester. How does that clause relate to a historic tree?
Question. So as it's currently written, which as we've mentioned, we need to go back and shore up a few details there. The historic tree applies section 4. And so as this is written, it would apply in the same way as of now. So you could remove the branch if it was broken or the provisions that 4D outlines it.
So if I have a historic tree and wind damage, it gets blown out.
Right.
And I've got a deed restriction. So I would just go to the forester or state legal and say, hey, I could get it cleaned up that way.
Right.
Okay. Now, a historic tree, this is not just in the right of way, it can be anywhere on the property.
Correct.
I do have one concern, I guess, on this. I do like this, but I'm just wondering about what's to prevent me from having a vacant lot next to me. I bought the lot next to me, and it's got some old trees on it. To designate the trees there as historical trees, basically meaning nobody can ever buy that lot and tear them down.
The forester has to approve the historic.
No, they're qualified historical trees, but I got a deed restriction on there, so basically making that lot unsellable.
Well, I'm thinking that this is more for like a single tree on a lot.
But I can designate as many as I want, right?
The forester has
if it qualifies. It's going to be three criteria.
Right?
They're going to have to qualify. So I mean, they'd have to be big, beautiful trees.
Yeah.
Or maybe big for their species, and so they'd have to qualify. So I don't know that they'd be able to come in and do that.
So under it says historical importance, stuff like this that's the tree that I planted when my first son was born.
Yes,
is that historical importance, or is that just importance to me? Would that meet that criteria? I know I got to meet the other ones too.
I think that may meet one criteria, but there's the remaining
I meet the other
list,
ones too, but
right? I think that would be historic to you. I think that would be.
But that may not be historical to the city.
Correct, but to the lot itself, I think that does.
So we're looking more at that.
Okay. Yeah.
Councilmember Carter. Okay, any other questions?
We move this forward to January.
I think we can. It sounds like there's just a few things to.
I think there's a few details to work out.
Could we make sure we add an implementation date like Councilmember Bierman suggested? Like goes into effect on a date certain, or I don't know what you'd recommend.
Like a July 1, that way we have next year's budget. We don't have this year's budget.
Because we could have it be effective April, but there's the suggestion of having someone from planning do it, but I think we should probably talk to them. Are they going to be compensated more while they're taking on these extra duties? I just think we need to.
The auditor position is funded for half a year, so there is funds in the budget to have a forester in place for half of the year. We're not going to hire an auditor. We've already decided that because we're going to the charter review committee to discuss whether or not how that should be arranged, and so that's going to take some time.
We talked in the interim.
And ultimately that'll be a vote of council. We don't debate that right now. The question to the finance committee was the finances. Is the forester position the same cost as a city auditor?
No.
And once we get that information, then we can decide whether or not to designate the auditor position to a forester, and that can all be done in January. The money's in the budget, for a city auditor position, which I'm going to guess that they're going to be comparable salaries. Maybe the forester's less expensive. I don't know.
Yes.
But ultimately, I think that's something that I've asked the city manager. It needs to be brought to council. It can be brought to council. Same time we do a first reading in January on this tree ordinance. The tree ordinance will have a 30-day provision before it can actually become effective. So it wouldn't become effective in theory till approximately March 1st, unless we did decide to add, a couple of months, a month or whatever on. I certainly don't think there's any reason to wait to July 1st or really any longer than we have to, because we've been talking about this since I remember the spring of 2017, like I said earlier, and city government moves slow as it is, and we don't even kick the can down the road. So let's do it.
Councilmember Clark?
Will we have a chance to look at the proposed changes before we go straight to first reading? That's would be my,
And
I would like to look at it.
If you all have time to do that, and Catherine has time to work on the language that has to do with the deed restrictions and how that can be cleared up if the tree has to be removed or dies, then those would be the things. And then I think it could just be sent out. I don't know that we need to have another meeting. And we still should be able to get that on, maybe not the first meeting in January, but by the second meeting in January.
And hopefully not only the deed restriction language, but again, maybe a timeline of when our goal is to switch auditor to forester and hiring, because again.
That was not our discussion. I'll refresh your memory on our discussion on the auditor, but for this purpose, that's not the case.
Well, then I would like clarification on what the plan is for that, because I really don't want to have.
Our discussion was we would hire the auditor mid-year, working towards a charter provision. But in the meantime, the auditor would report to council. Council, even though
That was not the discussion.
Okay, we'll pull the minutes up and look at it.
It's easy enough to look at the minutes and see what the discussion was.
I think this clarifies that we need to figure out the plan of how we're going to provide for and then hire, so we have a legitimate practical timeline, and then revolve the as effective date around that. I mean, surely by the third meeting or third week in January, we could have that.
I hope so.
I mean, it's not asking for the moon, but I would like to see that clarified to make sure that we're not putting stuff out there that we're just dumping more onto our staff to handle.
Well, we can certainly find out what the costs are.
Well, we have mid-year budget adjustments. We can add a position, whether it's the auditor or not. We can look at it.
The timeline to hire and all that, and I'm sure we want to do a good job in our tree city.
We got 14 open positions in public works. We could rename us civil engineers. I mean, we can. Money's up.
Okay, why don't we move that? They're going to work on.
Yes.
They're going to work on the language part. And we right now have in our mind that we're going to bring it back sometime in January. You all are going to get copies of it beforehand so that you'll know if there's anything else that needs to be changed. In the meantime, we'll have at least one finance committee meeting. And if we want to have another meeting where a conference committee or a study session where we discuss what we want to do about positions, then we can do that as well.
I think we should. I think it's responsible to do that. I mean,
okay. All right. All right. Thank you, Don, and thank you, Will. You guys have really
good job.
You have worked so hard, and we really appreciate you. Hung in there.
Yes,
It really stuck out. All right, this brings us to item number 5, discussion regarding diaper changing table requirements for commercial building permit applications. Jane Hudson, the planning director, will be presenting. Steve.
I'm clicking it. It's not. There we go.
Good evening, everyone. So we are back before you tonight for the discussion on the diaper changing table requirements. We were at Community Planning and Transportation Committee back in September and asked to bring forward possible ordinance or amendments to the existing building code for diaper changing tables. So just to review a couple of the things, historically, the diaper changing tables have been installed in the women's restrooms. Currently, we do not have anything that requires diaper changing tables to be installed. However, if one is installed, it does have to meet the ICC ANSI requirements for installation. One of the things that we discussed at the previous meeting was the possible requirements, male, female restrooms, family restrooms, definitely requiring them in new commercial developments, And then the discussion of additional alteration projects when more than 50% of the restroom floor area is modified, which we have some additional discussion on that as well. Also, we talked about not locating them in the accessible stall. So again, some photos. And on this last photo down here where we had it on the counter surface, there was a gentleman that was at the previous meeting, and he was saying that he had worked in the restaurant business, and that there was a concern that we believe that if a barrier panel is put up between the diaper changing table and the sink area, that it actually might work on the counter area. So for establishing the standards, we focus on both the change for the new construction, the addition alteration projects. We've established a definition here, which would move forward and be added to the building code. And then for the proposed building code amendments, we have building code for the new construction would go into the occupancies for assembly, restaurants, theaters, type uses, office buildings over 10,000 square feet, of course, commercial retail, and then any of the institutional I-1 and 2, which would be the assisted living facilities and hospitals. The exemptions would be educational, utility, factory hazard places, and spaces that restrict due to age. And then for the existing building code, I've got Amber Armstrong here. She's our CBO in the Planning Department and Development Services, and she handles all of the review for commercial applications when they come in. So she'll be looking at all these as they come across her desk. And I wanted her to be able to expand a little bit more. In doing the research from the September meeting, there was some questions about when more than 50% of the restroom floor area is modified. And I want to let Amber talk to you about that a little bit. Let her explain that to you instead of trying to go on with it.
So since we met the last time, I went back and looked at some of the permits that we've done in the last year, and just to see the type of work that we've seen. And you know, when we limit it to just the restrooms, we have to keep in mind that a lot of people that come in to work on a building try to avoid the restrooms because of the handicap accessibility requirements. So we might be having, you know, an opportunity to put these in. They're avoiding the restrooms, and if we tie everything to the restrooms, then we're really not going to have any added to any existing buildings. But when we think about the 50% of the floor area of the restroom, it's kind of hard to define. I've had 3 people ask me questions so far, and if you have a restroom that you're not changing the size of the room, you have the tile on the walls, you have the tile on the floor, you're not really changing the finishes, but you're going to remove all the toilets and you're going to remove all the sinks and all the compartments. Have you touched 50% of the room because you haven't increased the size, you haven't gotten into the structural elements of the wall? When you add the diaper changing, you have to add blocking behind it. So now you're going to have to tear the tile down, put the blocking behind it, put the tile back up. Or do you look at, are they changing the size of the room? Are they reducing it? Are they adding fixtures? Are they reducing fixtures? Tying it to the 50% of the floor area of the restroom, I need some direction on, where you want that trigger to be. We have a facility, Othello's, that burned down. We had requirements for that facility based on the amount of work that they did to bring in a sprinkler system. There was a lot of discussion about, whether they were modifying 50% or not. This is something that, literally they will take the square footage of the toilet and say, okay, I've only affected 2 square foot for this toilet. I've only affected 2 square foot for this toilet. But yet they've taken a 5 foot by 5 foot compartment out. There's a difference in the size there.
Councilmember Hickman and then Wilson.
When would we require them to bring the bathroom into ADA compliance?
So in an existing building. Right, in an existing building, when you do construction, you look at the technical feasibility of that. 20% of the construction budget or whatever work is going to be done is applied towards making the facility more accessible. There's no requirement as far as you have to do the bathrooms first, you have to do the doors second, you have to do the stairs. There's no hierarchy. The applicant gets to decide when they make that and where they make that change. So what I look at is, give me a letter that says my construction budget is $10,000. 20% of that is $2,000. So I've applied that in this way. I've spent $500 on hardware for the doors. I've spent $1,000 on new fixtures in the restroom. They change those fixtures out, but they don't modify anything else in the room. The room may not be fully compliant at that point, but it's more compliant than it was. When they get to 20%, they can exceed that, but we don't require them because the limit is 20%. If they get to 18% and there's nothing else that needs to be done, then they're finished. If there's something else that needs to be accomplished, but it's going to cost more than the 20%, then they just list that on the letter. We file that with the permit, and then we have a record of what they did and why they did it.
Councilmember Wilson.
I think that was my question. I think I understand the answer.
Councilmember Bierman.
So I've read probably 20 or 30 different diaper changing requirement ordinances from other cities, and it seems like they're pretty evenly split between modification of 50% of the restroom area, or anywhere from 30 to 60% of just the actual building footprint. My intent with having it be the restroom area was to minimize the added cost to the business owner or the property owner to install one of these. I noticed, I'd be curious, I think you might have mentioned this last time. Where did you get the numbers in the survey data that you cited in the memo? Because I've talked to 4 different contractors here in Norman and asked them what it would take to get to a $1,200 to $1,500 cost to add a diaper changing station, and they were like, building the wall. They were trying to come up with ways to actually make it cost that much, because none of them, believed, especially if you were renovating an existing bathroom facility, that it would cost nearly that much. So
$1,200 to $1,500.
Right, is what it said in the memo. And it said it based on a survey, but it didn't say, was that a local survey, a regional survey, national survey?
No, it was a local survey. I got it from one of the architects here too.
Okay.
And they'd asked some of their contractors, so I
Right.
who they asked.
Okay. Because that was really my intent, is that for renovations to have it be, as small of an added burden on the property owner as possible. Of course, new construction, it's, minimal cost to add it, because if you're putting new walls up, it's really easy to put one of these in. So I'm certainly open to amending that to make it, as easy as possible to put one in, while also making sure that we are increasing the number of diaper changing tables in this city, because this is, it's not just a gender equity and inclusivity issue, it's also an accessibility issue. I've spoken with a lot of people in the disability community who say, I can't go out to a vehicle to change a diaper. I need to be able to just go into a bathroom and do it, not on the floor, not on a sink, but actually in something that's designed for it, men and women. So, however we can get there. I'm certainly not tied to the 50% of the restroom floor area as, our trigger for renovations. But just my thought behind it was trying to minimize the added cost on property owners.
One thing, if I may, that we put into the language for the new construction is an alternative to the restroom location. So it wouldn't have to go into the restroom. It could be a room designated for that. Or if you, in an existing building, when you are making modifications and you do want to provide an accessible restroom, you provide a family use restroom. So it's unisex, so anybody can use it. That way you're not requiring, $1,500 in the men's and $1,500 in the women's. They're building the new unisex restroom, what we call family restroom, and they're adding it in there. I think part of the construction, or the $1,500, comes from, like I was saying, the blocking in the wall, the tearing off of the finished materials, the adding of the finished materials, plus the cost of the table itself, and then the labor involved. So, a $200 accessory can balloon very quickly.
Councilmember Carter? Okay, saw a hand, no? Councilmember Castleberry?
As opposed to us mandating or requiring this to be done, could we take the approach that if you do it, we'll take $200 off your building permit fee? We encourage people to do it. And put 200 to about what the, not the cost of the table itself. I mean, I would rather see us encourage people to do these type of things. I think you need to do them, but I just have a problem with requiring, especially men's. What if you don't have a family restroom? So I got to put one in my men's and women's restrooms. So I got to double my cost, or can I just have it in one?
Or like I said, you could set aside a separate room for just, well, I mean, I don't know that you would want to do it just for the diaper changing, but you could locate it in some place other than the restroom if you wanted to. Everybody thinks of them being in the restroom, but they, designers will come up with 1,000 different ways to do something.
Like a family room that could be used for nursing.
Right.
Councilmember Clark and then Councilmember Wilson.
I'll just throw out that as I've been sharing information about Councilmember Bierman's work on this, I've gotten a huge positive response, not just from women, but actually more from men who are wrestling with the issue of where do I take care of my child? It's not unusual. Like I have a friend right now who's on paternity leave for 8 weeks. So I appreciate your concerns as well, and perhaps an incentive is the way to go. But I definitely support moving forward with having more changing stations in both restrooms or a family room. That's a nice suggestion.
Councilmember Wilson.
So was I hearing you say then that you're maybe recommending, I guess the question was, how do you interpret the 50%, right?
Right.
And what was your recommendation?
That was one I toyed with a lot, and Jane and I talked about, if it could be very subjective based on the person doing the review, the person doing the application, and this is coming from you, from council, and I would really like to know how, at what trigger you want it installed.
I am personally, having just done a remodel and have done things like that, I don't think it's that cross prohibitive. It's kind of it just doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal. But so I think that the 50%, however you normally define it in other situations, was highly appropriate.
Councilmember Carter.
Is there a reason not to just say if you remodel a restroom, you're required to do this?
That would be one way of handling it. Several of the ordinances several of the ordinances I looked at tied it more to 50% of the whole building. One of the things that I added was if you are, if you're adding on to a building and you already have a diaper changing table in the male room, then you only add it to the female room. If you have it in the female, you only add it to the male. If you add a restroom to that facility, there's it's just, I'm sorry, it's just that the way that it's interpreted as far as the area of the room and how much you're affecting in the room and what you have to do to install it, because we don't want them in the accessible rooms. There may not be room outside of the accessible water closet or toilet compartment to install it appropriately. So I did put an allowance in that in that case alone, it could be added into the handicap restroom.
Councilmember Bierman and then Hickman.
At what level of a renovation are you required to pull a permit for a bathroom, let's say?
You talk to the Construction Industries Board, if you take a toilet out and put a toilet back in, they want you pulling a plumbing permit. People don't do that. If you extend the water line, you need to get a plumbing permit. You may not need to get a building permit in that case. If you modify the number of fixtures, You also have a situation where if you add square footage, you add occupant load, and your fixture count isn't accurate, then you're going to have to add, or appropriate, then you're going to have to add a fixture to account for that occupant load.
Might it be easier to interpret and easier to administer if we tied it to the pulling of a permit as opposed to doing a percentage of the building in which they might not be touching the restroom at all, or percentage of the restroom floor, that if you're doing an extensive enough remodel, you're not just changing the tile on the wall, then you would have to pull a permit. If you have to pull a permit for your remodel, then that's when it triggers the requirement.
If we tied it to the restrooms, I like the idea of if you make any modifications. Jane and I talked about, if you affect 50% of the fixtures in there, whether it be lavatories or toilets, that could be one way of tying it. There's just so many different ways that, every person that comes in has a slightly different configuration. In an existing building, if you've ever renovated, you have to have contingency fund because you just don't know what's behind the walls. That's the same thing with this. By saying it's 50% of the floor area, we don't know which part of the area they're going to be affecting. It could be that, that they take out half of the lavatories, but they don't touch the toilets. Well, yes, they've touched 50%, but they didn't take the finish off the walls. They didn't, change the size of the room.
I like the idea of the fixtures.
And so
more.
That's what you're doing now, is if it's 50% of the actual room itself, it's not 50% of the footprint. That's what I'm hearing you saying.
Well, that's what I'm asking is where we draw that line. Right now we don't have anything, and we don't have any requirement. So the language that we have in this proposal ties it to 50% of the area of the room. But if you're not changing the entire room, if you're gutting the room and you're taking out all the fixtures and you're putting new fixtures in, to me, that would be more than 50% of the room, because you've basically taken it down to the studs and you've completely put new finishes in.
But if it's a small room,
right,
you still have a problem. Councilmember Carter.
To me, it deals with the whole concept of bringing a building to code.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that kind of? Okay, so for example, if I bought an old house and I go to renovate it and I discover that the electricity is not to code, which happens all the time, what do you have to do? You have to bring it to code. Doesn't matter if you're renovating 50% of the building or a bathroom or changing the toilet out. If it was discovered, I think in that process that you were not to code. So I think what I personally am interested in seeing this city do is that we value handicap accessibility. We value changing tables. And so that becomes what I would consider, my hope would be is that this becomes the code. So if you're remodeling a building for whatever reason, and it's not to code with ADA, doesn't matter if you're remodeling 10% of it or 100% of it, you bring it to code ADA, or you bring it to code with changing tables. I just think that's a reflection of the values of our city. And that would be a reflection of my personal values.
Yeah, I agree with that philosophically. I think there's exceptions in the ADA depending on the size, if it's a very small area. Am I wrong about that?
The ADA talks about a barrier. It's part of the Barrier Removals Act. It's part of making a facility more accessible. So in an existing, in a brand new construction, everything that everything that they list has to be accessible. In renovation, they do it in phases. There's no requirement that says that you have to come in and replace everything that's handicap accessible. That's where the 20% of the construction budget comes in, that you do it over a period of time. So you may not at this renovation have a fully compliant building, but in 5 years when you renovate again, you work in a different area and you make that more accessible so that each time your building gets better, and then over the life of the building, eventually it will become compliant.
Okay, but it has nothing to do with the size then?
The size of the room or the size of the
The
building?
size of, like, if it's a small business?
No.
Okay. Councilmember Bierman.
I think unless anyone has objections to it, I think tying it to 50% of the fixtures being replaced might be an easier way to administer this as opposed to trying to figure out what comprises 50% of the square footage of the bathroom or the building. Because I do think you run into those situations where you're renovating more than 50% of a building but not touching the bathrooms. And so, I think if you're pulling out more than 50% of the fixtures, you're doing something pretty significant to that bathroom. That's just my thought.
Is that what's been done in the codes that you've looked at?
I didn't dive into how they defined 50% of the restroom, but that was a very common way of writing it in the ordinance. I don't know how they put it kind of into the policy. But I think that the fixtures do seem to be a pretty significant part of the bathrooms themselves. So, I mean, if you're just pulling down tile and putting new tile up, that's not nearly as significant as changing out more than 50% of the toilets and or faucets. So
I think that's reasonable. It's not physically feasible. Sky, if it's not physically feasible, but we can check on all that. It's not. Councilmember Hickman.
Do we have a minimum to be code current? I guess put it that way. Do we have a minimum size for a bathroom required, like 200 square feet or something? Or see my question?
Right. No, we do have an example that we hand out to give somebody an idea. There's no size requirement. There's clearance requirements for all of the fixtures. So depending upon what you put in that room and how you arrange it, I mean, I could take this room right here, and if I put the fixtures in the wrong place, it's a non-compliant room, and this is a very large room. If you squeeze the room down, elongate it, recess the lavatory behind the water closet, you can overlap some of the clearances so that square footage of that room is much smaller than if you put the fixtures on the same wall and space them out.
Because I agree with everything you said, and I've had 3 kids I've raised here in Norman and have dealt with this challenge myself personally. My only concern, representing Central Norman, and some old buildings, an example that comes to my mind is the Mont.
Mm-hmm.
Old building, beloved. And if you've ever been in those I've not been in the women's bathroom, but you've been in the men's bathroom, I don't know if it's compliant or not, but there's not a place that you're going to want to hang a changing table in that bathroom. I can promise you. They can go in there and take out all the fixtures, and if the size of that room doesn't change, there's just not space to put a changing table, I don't think. And I think of like Othello's, if it hadn't burned down, their bathroom was, pretty small.
Right.
Brothers, before it burned down. So I'm just thinking of those old buildings like that on Camp Square, that maybe there's some kind of a minimum floor size or wall space. I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is I don't want to force where the Mont has to then tear into their dining room to add on to their bathroom to put in a changing table. Not that I don't support this, I do 100%, but I don't want to create unintended consequences, especially for, area that I represent, this old town and these small businesses. And so that's the thought came to my mind as I was hearing this discussion, that I'm trying to think of what is a way of wording that, whether it's a minimum size bathroom, whether it's a minimum amount of wall space or something that provides this catch that, okay, you're exempted because, while you're doing this stuff in that bathroom, the footprint of your bathroom is under this required level, and therefore you're not required to put in a changing table, because to require you would have to actually expand the footprint of your bathroom, and meaning go into other area.
Right.
And I mean, I don't know if that makes sense or not, but I'm visualizing that bathroom in the Mont right now, and I'm like, I just don't see how in the world, even if they took out every fixture, there would be space.
So like the Mont.
Part of that's the way the bathroom is designed there.
Right.
It's an open trough urinal.
Right.
Yeah.
So if they were to renovate that building.
So the diner bathroom.
Yeah, the diner bathroom, exactly, yeah.
Right. So if let's take your building the Mont. If they renovate that building, depending upon, and I'm kind of backing into this, but depending upon the amount of work that they do, If it's a very extensive remodel, the budget will be higher, and then we get into the 20% making it more accessible. With respect to the bathrooms, you're right. There's not enough room, even if you took everything out, to get a handicap accessible bathroom, let alone add a diaper changing table to it. There is an allowance within the existing building code that where that facility may need, 2 male fixtures and 2 female fixtures, which if you have male and female fixtures, you're supposed to have male and female handicap fixtures. You build this family assist, the unisex or the family assist restroom, and you make it accessible, and that fits the requirements for both the male and the female. Now, that building's small enough that you would either be taking away dining space, or you would be taking away parking by adding on to the building to add that. A building like that is probably not going to do that extensive a remodel unless, like Othello's, had a fire.
But we're going to exempt those type of buildings for new construction. On the very bottom there, it says spaces that restrict interest due to age, liquor store / bars.
Mm-hmm.
So we're exempting it for new construction. Why would we not exempt it for remodeling?
We are. The same
Okay.
exemptions that apply for new construction would apply for remodels.
So we wouldn't have those situations
Right.
in like the Monts and some of the examples we've talked about. Where
Right,
would we?
but the Mont's
isn't 21.
not a bar, it's a restaurant, so they allow people
Okay.
under 21.
But if they start remodeling, they have a lot more trouble than
Mhm.
just
Right.
there. Yeah.
Right. They have some step issues inside that, I think their doors aren't quite wide enough. There's
I don't think
there's
their
quite a
intersection
few.
is big enough either.
Right.
Yeah.
But with the existing building code, there's a lot of things that are built in there, allowances that are built in for anything else, the other code requirements that we are enforcing right now to encourage redevelopment of an area as opposed to tearing it down and rebuilding new. And I kind of tried to style more the last, what we brought to you the last time. I kind of tried to style that over the same allowances of, where in the brand new one, any assembly would receive a diaper changing table. In the existing buildings, it would be an assembly over a certain size. I forget I was looking at that. There were several things that were, like I said, that were allowances to keep it from being prohibitive or from obtrusive into the business.
Okay, Councilmember Carter.
One quick comment in defense of culture and values. I went through just last week a situation in my ward with a garage owner who had a pit in his garage where he changed oil and stuff, and he pumped it directly into the street to go down the sewer that goes directly to the river, and he got caught by the city. And I know this guy for 30 years, and I just say, man, you just can't pump oil into the river, and he just doesn't get it. Well, the street, but it's just not it's our value, and so, I think we have an opportunity. Maybe the ADA thing is a stretch right now, but, if you're remodeling your building, having changing tables, you figure out a way to remodel it and bring it to code. And I'll defer to Council Member Bierman's expertise. She's been working on this, project for a long time. But, to me, I just don't think it's a stretch to say you're remodeling, make it compliant with changing tables. And if you're the Mont or Othello's or the Diner or McGee Street Animal Hospital would have to do it if we did it, so be it. It's our values.
And I think that's kind of what we're here asking is, at what point do you want that trigger to happen? Do you want it in all buildings? Do you want it only in certain size buildings? And keeping in mind that the bathrooms are high dollar places of construction, and they will avoid that area if they can.
That's why I'm saying if you're remodeling our waiting rooms, we need to make our bathrooms comply. My point. because they'll avoid it. They'll do everything they can to avoid it.
I think you still have to have some flexibility for the older, smaller buildings. Because we also don't want people not to remodel at all because we've required so much that they just don't remodel. And
So what about, how accessibility is tied to a percentage of the construction budget? For the smaller projects, you may not have that, you may not hit that threshold that you go work in the bathroom. But if we, and I don't know where this threshold would be, but we could tie it to a percentage of the budget. I mean, if you get to a certain budget or you get to a certain percentage of the budget that goes towards the diaper changing table. You add, I don't know, 2%, 5%, something like that goes towards the cost of the diaper changing table. And
so they're getting
if you
credit
have a,
for something.
Right.
Yeah. Right. That's an incentive. Councilmember Bierman.
Well, first of all, I think as you have detailed quite well, there are many ways to add diaper changing capabilities to a bathroom. It doesn't necessarily need to be in a wall. It can be freestanding. It can be on a countertop, things like that. So, I think we've provided flexibility in that regard as well. And I would just say, if we're going to be calling ourselves a family-friendly community, and an inclusive community, and a community that's going to be accessible to all kinds of people, then we need to make this happen. And we need to make it as least burdensome as possible. But I don't want to be so lenient with it that we only get them in new construction. So I still go back to changing the number of fixtures. And if places aren't going to remodel a bathroom for this reason, then chances are they're going to have a lot of customers not coming back, because if you have shabby facilities, people are going to notice. But I can't not go out to a restaurant. I can't not go out and shop with my child. I don't have that option. I have to bring her with me. And when my husband is out shopping with her for a birthday present right now, he's not going to have the ability to change her diaper in a public bathroom.
I totally get that. I don't have any problem with any of this. I think for the most part, this is going to be a non-issue. I think that people are going to be, I think most people want to do this. If they've got a family restaurant or a store that they want people to come into, they're going to want to do this.
You'd be surprised.
I'm just talking about the exceptions or the smaller, older places where it might be a big problem. I'm certainly not. I think we should move ahead with this. I don't have any problem with it. I'm just saying I think there's going to be some problems that come up because in particularly our older stores. But I think as long as we give them plenty of flexibility and we do a percentage and all that, I think it's fine. Councilmember Wilson.
Great work, by the way. I love it. Isn't there a variance process for if, we get into construction in lots of situations, we can't get a grease trap in here because of some major costs or exhaust fan. I don't know. There are things that just don't work in some of the older buildings. Do we have a variance process for that? And would it be feasible to just have a variance process? Like, okay, it absolutely won't work in the Mont.
Board of Appeals.
So the Board of Appeals could hear this $150 fold down table option. So we have options. We're not going to put them on out of business if we.
Just to be clear, I support what Councilmember Bierman said.
So the tie to
and then we need to really move, folks. We got
we got 5 minutes. Do it that way.
Okay, so I think most of us at home who have changing stations don't have them built into the wall.
Right.
Councilmember, is yours built into your wall? Or do you have a changing station table?
It's actually strapped to the wall because otherwise it's a pullover risk. But yes.
But it's a table.
Boom.
Okay. So I would like to find somewhere where we can allow for those type of things.
It is.
We did.
So we can allow, it doesn't necessarily have to be affixed to the wall or something like this.
Exactly.
You could have a changing table there. I mean, we want to
Yes.
secure stuff like that. So we've got that. I missed that part.
Wake up down there.
Again, I would like to see if we want to be a family inclusive community. We as a council are saying we want that. We're saying these are our values as a council, and why don't we pay for it? This is an unfunded mandate. What's the big deal about us paying $300 for people to do this? I mean, we want to incentivize. I mean, I just think we ought to pay for it.
Okay, options on incentives. I think that what we have here is fine. We had the suggestion that we use 50% of the fixtures as one of the things we could go by in the bathroom. We did have a question about variances and if there was some kind of variance.
It's already built into our process.
That's already built into the
Okay.
administrative chapter.
All right.
So we wouldn't add anything special for this.
Okay.
Yes.
So
We'll see this in January.
Thank you.
Where are we going?
Thank you.
I think I think this may also be ready to come back to the council
I agree.
in terms of just sending out any of the changes that were made, and then it can go on a agenda as well.
Progress. Right, move things along.
Hey, Mary,
Who says city government moves slow?
And I hope that it was pulled from
So
the consent
I
docket
looked at
for my
what
request.
permits we've
because
done
I
since
don't
the first of the year.
I mean, I think we
To
did.
January,
Well, I mean,
November.
you still, when
We did 117 permits.
Yeah,
that were affected. The first proposal that we brought, it would have had 63 facilities.
Remind me what the original, other than bathrooms square footage, what did you have originally?